Raymond, it's good to have you with us. I think there's a mistaken belief here from many people in the U.S., Christians especially, that things are getting better for Christians in Egypt, but you recently wrote that that is not necessarily the case, that there is a mob mentality. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. There's a mob mentality. There's been one for quite a while, and no matter what, who's in charge of the government, the Muslim Brotherhood, the military, Sisi, or so forth, you have the mob that's, easily provoked, and then behind the mob, you have the Islamic clerics, specifically the Salafis, who incite the mob, and this is, easily discernible when one considers that almost all the violence, the systematic violence that's committed against Christians and their churches in Egypt occur on Friday. Now, Friday is for Muslims what Sunday is for Christians. That's actually when they meet in the mosque and that's when they pray. So I think it's very telling that when they come out of the mosques, what they do is attack Christians. And of course, look at the analogy: if Christians in Sunday were most violent and intolerant to non-Christians, what would that tell you goes on in churches? But and then what does go on, of course, in the mosques is, and we come to the ultimate source of this, preaching based on Islamic teachings, Islamic verses in the Quran and the Hadith and so forth. And so this is why it's a much more complicated issue, and it's not something that's going to go away depending on who's in charge of Egypt, because it kind of permeates really the culture.
And you have one example. This is Mary George. Tell us about Mary George. What happened to her?
Well, it's a very unfortunate, though increasingly typical story. Mary George was a young, 20-ish Coptic woman who, during a Friday, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, was parking at a church, and the Muslim Brotherhood was rioting because they had just come out of the mosques. And according to one eyewitness, of course, or several eyewitnesses, her cross identified her, the cross in her rearview mirror of her car. Her car was rampaged, attacked. She was pulled out, beaten, tortured, and killed, either by being stabbed, as one initial report said, or by being shot with a gun. But all reports indicate that it was because she was identified as a Christian because of her cross. And of course, she was there doing a very Christian thing, basically bringing medicine for an elderly woman who was in need of it.
And I understand, and I know you've seen it too. Many Coptic Christians in Egypt identify themselves with a tattoo on their wrists or their hands that show that they are a Christian. So it's something that they can't get away from no matter where they go. They are identified. So this isn't just an infrequent occurrence, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, the tattoo on the wrist, which you're correct about, goes back centuries, and it was to identify themselves, often from being attacked and kidnapped and so forth, to basically declare that they are Christians. And it goes way back. But the incident that we're discussing, unfortunately, that pattern goes way back in Egypt and throughout the Islamic world. And to go back to the point, who's in charge of Egypt? Will that change? Really, if you look at a point I like to stress, we know that, for example, North Korea, Christian persecution is supposedly ranked worst in the whole world there. But we know that if you just get rid of one man, one tyrant, one regime, it all ends because it's really rooted in him. But in these Islamic nations, as we've seen repeatedly, beginning with Saddam Hussein and in Afghanistan, and then in the Arab Spring in Libya and in Egypt, and now in Syria, wherever you actually get rid of these autocrats, things actually get worse for Christians and other minorities. And of course, the point is, because this is not something, it's not top down, it's actually part of the civilization. And we have so much backing to support this assertion through historical documents written by Muslims themselves.